But I totally agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of things that you need to be able to do that aren't necessarily best done on the blockchain itself. Like, for example, microtransactions. You know, the blockchain, or also instant transactions. The blockchain might be a little too slow or a little too expensive for certain transactions, even though that's where you want to have everything rooted.
Jeff, anything you want to say?
Well, I definitely have been preaching the gospel of layers. Bitcoin, I tell everybody, it's not a solution to everything. It's a base layer upon which you build other payment systems, other layers, including things like credit cards, things of that nature, other financial tools, futures options, bonds. It is just sort of a base technology layer for achieving consensus, and from there are a great many possibilities and solutions.
You did some work with bonds, is that right?
Yeah, and one example is called smart coins or bit bonds or things of that nature, where you can actually transit through the blockchain. It tracks by your own private keys who owns that, who can spend those bitcoins. And using that same analogy or technology, you can say, well, this Bitcoin represents a bond, or this Bitcoin represents a share in a company. And with an additional layer of software, you can easily track through the blockchain how these shares are transacted. I can easily sell my shares in widget company to JR here, and there's no intermediary. I'm directly transferring it, just like I'm directly transferring Bitcoins today.
Well, just a small comment that I think I agree that it's a base layer we have with the blockchain and everything today, and that'll build things on top of that. But also it's important to note that the things that are built on top of it are most often things that require trust in some sense. So you will require some points of trust, which is kind of one of the nicest things you have with the entire concept of Bitcoin, is that it's a trustless setup.
I want to just add one other thing. A guy emailed me recently. I hope he's here, Chris. If you're here, I'm going to use your analogy. He said, there's all these alt currencies out there doing really interesting experimental things, but they're not building on top of Bitcoin. And he compared it to 64-bit processors when they came out. He said, there's some 64-bit processors that were backward compatible with 32-bit programs. And there were some that said, hey, everybody go out and write all new software for 64-bit systems. Well, guess which ones were adopted and were more successful? The backward compatible ones. And if you're out on an alt chain, you're not really backward compatible. You're not leveraging the massive hashing power of the Bitcoin network. There's a lot of things that you lose out of an alt chain. And if you build right on top of Bitcoin, you are leveraging all of that, and you get backward compatibility with Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. And I really think it's an important point that by it's very tempting when you do something new to just start over again, and you can really wipe everything clean. It's very simple, but you really in the long run gain much more from the background compatibility and also building on top of it. So it might be harder initially, but in the long run there's the system that's survived as well.
It's actually possible to have a merge mining chain. So do you want to mention that, Jeff, maybe?
Well, that actually dovetails into part of what I was thinking in terms of just one of my future Bitcoin scenarios. This not directly addressing the question necessarily, but one of the solutions for alt currencies is to backpack on top of the current hashing power of the Bitcoin chain, and that's called merged mining. And the miner inserts a hash into the block header, or I think it's the Coinbase, and that hash in turn anchors another chain. It can be a totally separate currency, like the name coin is an example of one that's currently merged mined, though its life is sort of questionable. But in general, you can anchor a currency by building on Bitcoin's hashing power. And I'm not going to make any predictions on this panel about what the future of Bitcoin will be. I see a prism of many futures and many technical possibilities. One possibility is that the Bitcoin chain and the hash power primarily anchors another currency that is more widely used in day-to-day transactions and things like that. There are many future scenarios for Bitcoin, and so that's like one of many, but that's what is technically possible today.
What do you guys think about having dollar coins, euro coins, same technology as Bitcoin, but backed by actual dollars and euros?
I think that's going to be really, really important. Like stuff that you're doing, I think it's going to be very, very important. Probably a lot more than people realize yet, but it's definitely figuring big into my own future plans. And I can just give one example of why is, think about one of the reasons why we don't use gold as currency today. One of the reasons is because whenever you exchange gold, you incur liability for capital gains taxes. So for example, if I acquire gold at $1,500 an ounce, and then later on I sell it for $1,600 an ounce, then at that point, that $1,600, I technically would owe 15% capital gains tax on that $1,600. And the only way I can get out from under that tax is by deducting the $1,500 I spent when I first bought the ounce. So I have to produce my receipt from the original purchase and then deduct that from the amount that I got from the sale, and then that way I only owe 15% capital gains tax on the $100 that would be left over instead of the full sale amount. So you sort of have to save all your receipts and then deduct them from the sale price and all. This is sort of tax mess that you have to deal with, and that's why you can't really use gold as currency, because you don't have to do that with dollars. And so that's what I think colored coin solves, because anytime, let's say you have a colored coin that's worth $100, anytime that you acquire and then sell colored coins, it's always the exact same price. There's not some difference in price that requires tracking for capital gains purposes.
Let's define colored coins for people who don't know in the audience. Basically, you take a small fraction of a Bitcoin and you say, this small fraction of a Bitcoin is a US dollar, or it's an ounce of gold, and it is that because I say it's that, and I will always pay the value of a US dollar for it. And as long as people trust you, you can issue those and people can trade them and use them in commerce. This is actually very similar to what Ripple is doing. If you kind of strip away a lot of the trust networks and everything from Ripple, what you really have is a way for people to issue their own currencies and in a distributed way. And in fact, you can do that with colored coins just as easily right on top of the Bitcoin network. Colored coins is just one way to do it. The thing I don't like about colored coins is I can't just invest in colored coins in any way other than just buying Bitcoins. And I think there's a lot of money to be made by giving people a way to invest in new protocol layers.
So can I ask you a question about the color coins?
I'm not a spokesperson for this.
So when you trust, you introduce this trust again because you trust the guy that issued the color coins, that he'll give you back your dollar, which is nice. But why can't you just put it in his own database? What does he gain from putting it into the blockchain? You trust him anyway, so you can just have that.
You can use it in decentralized commerce.
You can do, yeah, but this means that these should have a decentralized network of people trusting each other.
Well, you all have to trust the issuer. As long, if I give you, you have to trust the issuer too. If you're going to set up a store that accepts, gold-colored coins, we both have to trust the issuer. I believe there's a way around that. If we have time, I'll talk about it, but I'm not sure how far we can get into it.
Two different forms of trust here. The first form of trust is that you have to trust the issuer to cough up the money later on. When you come back with your Satoshi and you say, oh, this thing's really worth a gold coin, you're going to give it back to me.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to trust that he actually has that gold coin sitting in his warehouse somewhere. The other piece of trust is you have to trust that he's keeping track of it properly, his ledger. And that's what the colored coins removes from the equation. That now you have sort of this global ledger and everyone can see exactly what he's on the hook for. Whether or not he actually has the gold is a separate question, but at least you don't have to trust him with the database to, what if he manipulates the balance or something like that.
That's actually a really nice lead-in to something else. Whether or not the person that you're trusting